Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to episode 2 of the Black Firm. My name is Kai. I'm your host. Today is Saturday, March 2nd. And I really appreciate everybody for joining in. Please subscribe if you're not subscribed now. Like and comment on the video. But let's go ahead and get right into it. So today's topic is the rise of the far right. And I think what more than appropriate time to talk about this than right now. We've got elections coming up here very quickly. And I just want to talk about this resurgence of the far right we're seeing, not only in our politics, but in our media and even societally. So let's go ahead and dive into it. First off, let's define the far right so we can just all kind of start from the same page. Now, this is defined as the more extreme supporters or advocates of social, political, or economic conservatism or reaction based generally on the belief that things are better left unchanged. I think that definition is a little bit reductionist in this sense, but, you know, if we really analyze what's going on and the political climate of right now, we can definitely see that sentiment all around us. I can't specifically say America is a fascist country, but I can say that we are definitely showing symptoms of fascism, and we're headed down the slippery slope quickly. I do want to make the parallels between fascism and the far right. They're not the same thing, but I do think far right politics quickly leads to authoritarianism and fascism. Now, there's 5 elements of fascism, and let's talk about each one individually and kind of break down some of the elements as they pertain to our current scenario. The first pillar or element of fascism is the rejection of democracy, the rule of law, and equal rights under the law in favor of a strong man who interprets the popular will. We can see this so clearly just with Donald Trump saying in 2020 the election was stolen. Now, me and you both know that there's no evidence of widespread election fraud or anything like that. But we also have heard the phone call of him calling into the representative of Georgia and asking them to find more votes. Now, Donald Trump is very specific with his language, calling America and saying that it's turning into a banana republic. Now, I find that term very offensive, first off, my family being from Guyana, but I find it very accurate from what he's talking about. This completely disregard for the rule of law and equal rights under the law. We're seeing, not only did they try to steal the election, but when they were unsuccessful, they stormed the Capitol in a violent insurrection. Where else are we seeing this? We have to be very cognizant of exactly what's going on. We have to look at Germany, right after World War I in the 1930s, or Italy in the 1920s, where we're seeing this rise of ultranationalism. And we're seeing these politicians who are using specific rhetoric in order to drum up an emotional response in their supporters. Donald Trump is using these exact same tactics. We have to look at even the concept of Make America Great Again. That concept doesn't come from Ronald Reagan. Let's be real. That concept comes from Make Germany Great Again. This was echoed all through Nazi Germany after World War I and Germany being war-torn. This is what they were saying. Let's make Germany great again. Now, while I believe Donald Trump to just be the ignorant old white dude, I can't deny that he's surrounded by very intelligent, young Republican, far right-wing people. And they're good at what they do. So we can't just chalk up the things that he's saying to some, just some coincidence. We have to understand that there's meaning behind the words that he uses. There's intent. It's very intentional. Now, the second element of fascism is the galvanizing of popular rage against cultural elites. And we see this often, again, within the far right, where we have people like Donald Trump saying that, the media is the elites who led us from the financial and foreign policy disaster to another. I find it very funny that Donald Trump tries to remove himself away from the elites. Like, you've been dealing in real estate in New York since the 80s or since the 70s. Like, you are the elites that you're talking about. You're the right? Like, how is he trying to remove himself away from this? Like, that's you. And he's very efficient in getting his supporters to believe that, he's the Thomas Jefferson, the yeoman farmer of the people. And I find it so I actually find it funny that these poor white Southern folks and just poor Midwestern people who have a lot more in common with black people than the elite whites. These poor white people, he's able to drum up support from these people. And it's the same Southern strategy that Barry Goldwater and Lee Atwater used of saying, well, even though poor white folks, you guys might be, towards the bottom of society, we're going to ensure that you're not below the people of color, right? and it's been a very successful strategy since the beginning. Now, the third one is nationalism based on a dominant superior race and historic bloodlines. This one right here is very we have to put a lot of context into this one, especially when he's talking about things like, Charleston, and there's good people on both sides. Like, what does it harm you to condemn the Klan or to condemn the neo-Nazis? Like, how does that harm you in any sense? Why? You know what it does is he knows that he has support on the far right, and he knows that if he was to condemn them, he would lose a large portion of his supporters. That silent majority that everybody talks about is a lot more conservative, is a lot more ultra-nationalist than we give credit. We have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene saying America should be a Christian nationalist country. Christian nationalism is just another way to say white supremacist. It's literally just another synonym that they've created. We go back to what Lee Atwater was saying in the first episode about how you have to change the wording and say states' rights and busing as opposed to just being outwardly racist, because people do get hip. And so what you have to do is change the language. And that's kind of what we end up with today. We have the Christian nationalism that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz are talking about. I think that it's also, another portion of this is, like I said, the media. When we look at people, even like Tucker Carlson, inside the media, Tucker Carlson, I think the guy's an idiot, but he has a very strong following, a very young, strong Republican following. And we have an example of him talking about the Great Replacement theory. And if you're not familiar, it's basically the theory that migrants and black people are replacing white people at unprecedented numbers. Now, obviously, this is rubbish for anybody who's educated and understands this is rubbish. But we do have young people who are taking this rhetoric to heart. The Buffalo shooter, for example, the mass shooting in Buffalo where, the young man killed all those people in the grocery store. If you look at his manifesto, he mentions that Great Replacement theory. Now, is that just a coincidence? I really don't think so. We're talking about the same young man who had the N-word written on his weapon while he's hunting down these black people in this grocery store. And it's not just white people. I want to make it very clear that, even black people or any race can be proponents or harbingers of white supremacy. For example, we look at people like Candace Owens and PragerU. I don't know how many people have done research in that or looked into it, but I was looking at one of the PragerU courses, and it was talking about Rosa Parks, and it was saying how it didn't give the details that she gave up her seat because she was forced to, because it was Jim Crow. It was just saying that she just didn't want to give up her seat, and she didn't want to give up her seat when a white person or when a person asked, and that's kind of the end of the story. And I'm like reading this, like, yo, that takes away the main element from this story. Like her being a black woman and, not, and by law having to give up her seat to a white person because of Jim Crow, because of segregation, right? That's the main element to the story. Like, how is that not what we're teaching? And so I definitely find it funny, not, funny, weird, that there's been a continued effort to erase our history, erase black people's history in America, erase the true story. And we see that in Florida, if we look at the Stop Woke Act, and we see that within the legislation, it says that if the information makes people uncomfortable, then it should be excluded from the curriculum. And it is, as we're seeing more people today become more hungry for knowledge and more hungry for the story, the way that it actually happened, we are also seeing an equally concentrated effort to suppress that. And the reason for that is because the powers that be understand that the more people go look and research history and look at things the way that they happened, people are going to start asking for restitution. They're going to start asking for restitution for the damages. Now, the fourth element of fascism is extolling brute strength and heroic warriors. Now, we've heard Donald Trump say this multiple times. I am your warrior, right? Like, I am your sword. Only I can save you. Saying things like this, again, is conditioning people. And again, I'm not going to claim America of being fascist quite yet, but we are headed that way. Now, the last one is disdain of women and fear of non-standard forms of gender identity and sexual orientation. This is something where, and I remember specifically, Donald Trump was saying, okay, we're going to create a bill to only define two genders, male and female. But that's completely leaving out intersex people, right? Those are people as well. And so what we're seeing is even Donald Trump saying, Wade versus Roe, I did that. When we look at these things, these are concentrated efforts to suppress those movements. And when I think about things like, okay, is black capitalism the way out? If we attain more money and we become more financially literate, is that the way that black people are going to get more equity in America? I can honestly say no, that's not going to happen. If we look at Seneca Village or Tulsa, Oklahoma, we see these instances where we've tried to open up our own Wall Streets, where we patronized our own business, and we did well, right? And what happened? They were burned to the ground. They were flooded. They bombed Philly in the 80s. They were burning down the Bronx in the 90s and 80s. So we've had multiple attempts at becoming self-sufficient and creating our own community, our own economies. But we see that the government, through things like COINTELPRO, says that America or says that Black Americans' liberation or liberation movement is one of the largest threats to security in America. The FBI said that themselves. Now, I do want to go ahead and wrap up this episode, but I'll end it with this. When I talk about restitution and reparations, one of the main critiques or rebuttals that I get is, well, you were never a slave. You weren't there for that. And I understand the sentiment, but in reality, if my ancestors worked for free and their labor was stolen, but I don't deserve any of that money, then the companies and corporations that exist that trade that money today on the stock exchange should have to seize that money. They shouldn't have access to those funds either. That's all stolen labor. Looking at places like Chase Bank or Bank of America, who started off on literally insurance policies on enslaved people, DuPont Chemical. There's so many different entities in America today that started off from slave labor who exist today and trade that money on the stock exchange. So I guess my sentiment is, if we don't deserve any of the fruits of our labor, of the labor of our ancestors, then those businesses also don't deserve that money. And the US government is also part of this, because not only were they complacent, but they took part in the slave trade actively. And that's something that we have to address. So go ahead and wrap up this episode. I do think it's very important that we talk about the United States empire with the language that they use against other countries. They're so quick to say, okay, well, these places are neo-imperialists or colonialists, or they commit genocide or ethnic cleansing. But when we talk about the Trail of Tears, we don't talk about it as an ethnic cleansing, which it was. You know, Andrew Jackson has a portrait and a bust in the White House today. One of my rival high schools in Jacksonville, Florida, is Andrew Jackson High School. We use these terms like genocide or ethnic cleansing. We don't apply it to the American empire, and I think it's time that we start now. Donald Trump got into office through sensationalism, through yellow journalism, through slandering people and using, riling vocabulary. And I think as the left, it's very important that we do the exact same thing. Anyhow, y'all stay vigilant, stay black. Anyhow, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you watching the video. This is episode 2 of The Black Firm. So subscribe if you're not subscribed. And I'll chat with you next week. Thanks so much for coming.